Well, welcome everyone. My name is Franz Hartmann. I'm with the Municipal Leaders for Stronger Communities. We're a network of community leaders who want to provide a space for municipal leaders to access experts, knowledge, and resources to help build stronger communities. This is the third webinar we've hosted since we launched at end of November. Before we launch into that webinar, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that the land I am on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto, where I am right now, is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. These are lands that were meant to be shared with nature and in a way that honors the life that we have been given. The history of this land clearly demonstrates that we have not lived up to this intention or promise. To have hope for future generations, to have a sustainable world for them, we must recognize the value in each other, reconcile for past tragedies, and ensure compassionate care and concern for all. Further, we must recognize that the various components of our ecosystem, the land, air, water, flora, and fauna, are all interdependent and need to work in harmony. The only way forward is together. So, as I said before, welcome to our third webinar, Addressing Local Housing Issues from Ineffective to Effective Solutions. You can view the other two webinars at the EcoSpark YouTube channel. And I'm going to ask Ian to close down this page and pop that link into the chat function. That's the EcoSpark channel. And a very special thanks to EcoSpark for partnering with us. Now to a quick overview of what to expect. We're starting with a panel discussion followed by a Q&A, which will likely take us to about 5 p.m. or so. And then we're going to stay on the call and have a bit of an after discussion for those who want to stay on. I'm not sure our panelists can stay on, but some of us will, because I no doubt we're going to get lots of food for thought today. Before we start with the panel discussion, I just want to spend a moment to find out, for all of us to find out a bit about each other. Let me hand things over to Ian Borsick, the Acting Executive Director of Environment Hamel, to walk us through one simple poll question. Ian.
Hey everybody, so I'm just going to be launching a poll in Zoom. It's a single question, and I'll shut it down when we get as close to 100% as possible. I see the results coming in now. I'll be able to share the results with everyone once we get there. But the faster we get your answers, the faster we can get to the interesting panel that we have in store. Alrighty, we're almost done. We're over 90% now. I'll let a few stragglers fill it in. Almost at 100%, which is pretty good. Folks are getting much faster at this as we keep doing these webinars, I feel like. So yeah, I'm going to close it there. And thank you so much, everyone. So we had about 11 folks who are elected and serving their first term, 14 folks who are an elected official and serving 2 or more terms. We have 2 municipal staffers, good to see you guys on, and 22 community members. And I'll share those results with everyone, and I'll hand it back to you, Franz. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So let's now turn things over to Margaret Profits, our panel moderator. Margaret is the Executive Director of Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition and is a respected community leader who understands the importance of connecting and working with municipal leaders in Simcoe County to build strong communities. Margaret.
I made the rookie mistake of forgetting to take my mute button off. So there you go. I've been doing this for a bit and every now and again, I still mess it up. That's fine. For those of you that have been coming to these webinars before, you would recognize me. Been having lots of really great discussions. So whether you're a municipal leader or not, I really suggest you check out some of our other videos that we've done because they've been really great. And as Franz said, afterwards, I'll be hosting an after space, which is just a casual spot where people, if they want to discuss more or they want to share some ideas, I'll be doing for 15 minutes. It's not required. And people that want to stay on can stay on, and those that want to go can go. So you're all invited to that as well. I am fortunate enough today to have two great panelists. I've had the pleasure of getting to know them and work with them over the years. First, we have Colin Best. This is in no favoritism order, just to be clear. I'm just doing it by the script, and I think it's alphabetical, so by last name. So no offense there, Kevin. Colin Best is the president of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, a position he holds until 2024. He is a lifelong Milton resident and was first elected as a local councillor in 1980. He is now a regional councillor and sits on Milton Council and Halton Region Council. And then we have Kevin Eby, who is a registered professional planner who served as the director of community planning with the regional municipality of Waterloo from 1999 to 2015 and has extensive experience dealing with the growth plan implementation. He also sat on the province's Greenbelt Council from 2018 to 2020. Thank you to both of you for being here and agreeing to have this discussion with us. We have roughly about half an hour of kind of these moderated questions. For people that are on, if you have questions that you'd like the panelists to answer after, then you can put it in the Q&A or the chat, feel free. So today is about housing. I know a lot of municipal councillors in my region struggle with it for various reasons. Some are thinking of the affordable lens, some are thinking about, how do they afford expanding housing. So today we're hoping to, this is going to be a series. This is part one of our housing series. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the conversation around housing, because I think there seems to be, around the housing crisis, there's a lot of talking points, but also at the same time, not a lot of specificity or solutions. And so that leaves stakeholders like municipalities and advocates and community members kind of in a black zone, if you will, of not sure where to go. So, I don't think there's too many people that would disagree that we have a housing shortage. I don't think there's anybody on this panel that doesn't think that that's a thing. However, the framing of the issue kind of points fingers at certain people as being to blame, and also just talks in generalities. And so I'd like to pose to both of you, and I'll start with you, Kevin, first, and then follow up with you, Colin. What are some issues that you have with how the housing discussion is being handled, or how it's being generated right now? Like, when you think about the housing conversation, what are some things that are bothering you, or some things that you think that the conversation is getting right or wrong? So Kevin, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Colin.
I think for me, the most frustrating part about the process is that it isn't a discussion. The province determined there was a problem and looked to one group, which was the development industry, for answers. Broad consultation on the measures, I think, was cursory at best. And as a result, I think that destroyed much of the goodwill necessary to bring people to the table to work together to solve what are incredibly important and very complex issues. These are serious problems, and we need everyone on board to solve them. Unfortunately, many groups, including municipalities, were left on the outside of the process, and this has done little to help. The second, kind of just quickly, the second issue for me is the lack of a definition of the problem. We're told 1.5 million homes are needed by 2031, but there's no indication as to how that number was arrived at, and therefore what the number represents. And what I'm talking about is what sizes, what types, what tenure, what location, what price points are needed for the housing that we're supposed to be building. The housing market is not even remotely homogeneous, and the solutions to shortfalls in one sector can often have little relevance to another. Without understanding the true nature of the problem, municipalities are being asked to commit to housing pledges that they can't possibly understand, and quite frankly, have limited control over.
Thank you, Kevin. Colin, is your role within your own local government, but also representing municipalities across Ontario, what is it about the discussion that bothers you, or you'd like to see change? Add to Kevin's points. Oh, you're on mute there, sorry.
I know, I made a rookie mistake too. But fortunately, I'm operating from my deluxe basement office here, which has the furnace running at the same time. But regards to Kevin's comments, yes, I agree. It's a complex issue. It needs everybody at the table. because, as mentioned, Margaret, when you started, is about pointing fingers. Well, I'd rather extend hands. And that's one thing I've been trying to do at all levels. And basically, if the province wants us to make commitments, for municipalities, the province also has to commit. And if you've seen some of the housing pledges, we've also requested the province fund their share of infrastructure, such as schools, hospitals, and transportation. But in terms of the bigger problem, it is the decline in the market of multi-residential housing. Do you have my slide available that I sent you?
Yeah, I can, Ian can
You
pull
could
that
post
up
that,
in just a
maybe.
second here. Yeah.
Yeah, I could give everybody an example because, builders, build because they can make money at it. If they can't make money, they won't build it. And this is part of the problem we have in terms of multi-residential, where the real core of the problem. Yeah. Sorry, this is basically where we are in terms of completions. As you can see, it's a real change over the years, but take a look at the apartment side. It's declined over the years. And actually, if you go to my next slide, this is my second slide. Yeah, this is in terms of the residential growth. This didn't start last year. This started a few years ago. This is just my own community, and I know other municipalities are the same situation. It started declining in 2018. So a lot of it, and I talked to builders, is because they saw, a situation where they couldn't make money at it. So they basically either held back their supplies to make sure that they had enough money at it, or they're going to be making a situation where they can either hold the market to get the highest return. And if I was a builder, I'd do the same thing. But beyond that, we are now reaching a point where there's a number of changes since Bill 23 was announced, of higher interest rates. Now, talking to builders, they have financing challenges where banks and other financial institutions will not lend the money to build. So they're holding up things, plus construction costs, availability of materials and labor is also it. So it's not just any one solution. It's all parties have to be involved. And that's what the Ontario Big City Mayors asked back last June, is to get everybody at the table, federal, provincial, municipal, builders, and say, okay, what can we do together? Because there is a number of solutions, and people around this table have already mentioned some of them. But it's something that we all have to work together. And I'm certainly willing to do it as part of AMO.
Thanks, Colin. You make my job easy because you provided me with a great little segue into what I wanted to talk about next. Was a part of it, pulling apart this narrative and understanding that it's really focused on, you guys need to kind of get better. You guys is involves a lot of different things, from conservation authorities to community members to municipalities. You guys have to get your act in gear. They also, on the other side, talk about solutions. You mentioned Bill 23, you mentioned some of the regulatory processes that have changed. So even though there's been few and far between, they have talked about their solutions to the housing crisis. Do you believe that what's been proposed thus far will lead to more housing in a way that you think is effective for municipalities and communities?
Partly. One aspect of Bill 23 that was announced that nobody really talked about is the change in the assessment ratios for multi-residential. Traditionally, apartment buildings or multi-residential rental buildings were assessed at 2 to almost 3 times what single-family detached. The province brought that down to 1 to 1. So basically, it's the same tax ratio, which should, in the long run, reduce rents and also make it more of an incentive for builders to build. Plus, the change that Mr. Clark made of changing single-family zoning to 2 to 3 units. And for a lot of neighborhoods, that would actually change things around, because what I find is interesting in a lot of neighborhoods that I'm also a former appraiser, there's a lot of mature neighborhoods are actually declining in population. A lot of it, people built in the 50s and 60s, where you had a family of 4 or even 5 people, now are just 1 and 2, and their children or grandchildren are going, okay, where do we go? Well, here's a solution. You create a duplex or a triplex out of that house. Usually, it's a larger size house that they can do this. So there is solutions there. But one of the other points that municipalities are doing is transferring their paper-based formats into digital. which the province has helped out with their modernization funds. So there is solutions there to reduce the time, to increase the efficiency. And it's something that municipalities have the same labor shortages that the builders have. We have a demographic wave here where we have a lot of retirement of senior positions in building, planning, and other departments, where it's difficult to find qualified people. And right now, throughout Ontario, I believe the last stat I heard was 150 planning positions are open. Well, that affects every municipality.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up some of those. Kevin, what would you like to add about the solutions that have been proposed, and whether you think some of them are going to lead to more housing?
I would support the statement that the accessory dwellings is a key one, and I think that we're finding in municipalities today. For example, I was looking at data from the region of Waterloo the other day. You go back 10 years, accessory dwellings were 2%. Now they're almost 10%. They're becoming something that is available to homeowners in order to create a unit, create some income, great things for seniors. If the ability to create a second unit may allow them to stay in their house longer, it may allow them to have somebody available for them should they fall, there's somebody around very close. So there's all kinds of opportunities there. It has the potential to turn people into developers. We need to find a way in order to make it simple. We need to work with municipalities to do templates, to bring forward changes. So, that's a good one. And there are some, I don't think there's any question that there are also some short-sighted things in there that are actually going to hinder future development. I have absolutely no idea how elimination of regional planning or neutering of the conservation authorities is going to create new housing. It doesn't make sense. And when you take a look at some of the other things that are in there, again, they're based on a premise that we need to basically do everything we possibly can to create new housing, even at the expense of, in some cases, the environment, in some cases, good planning, in some cases, creating the kinds of neighborhoods that people actually want to live in. So I think there's some good, I think there's some bad, I think there's some things that I have no idea how they're justifiable based on the need to build housing. At the end of the day, I think we're actually, in a situation where the confusion that's been created, especially around development charge collections, the potential there, that confusion and resentment has actually taken us backwards. You combine that with the economy, and I think we're probably in worse shape than we would have been if in fact none of this had happened, especially when you take a look at how much development is actually approved or already in process in Ontario. A lot of this wasn't needed. Some good, most of it I'm not sure helps.
Thank you for that. And Colin or Kevin, if you want to add into it, feel free. Do you have anything to add? I saw you making notes, Colin, so I just want to check to see if there is anything you wanted to add to this piece.
Just on Kevin's point, we've also noticed the same in my area too. Instead of 10%, actually secondary dwellings were actually 20% last year. So it was already happening because of the financial challenges that homeowners are facing. And also we're getting more multi-generational families, through new immigrants. Basically their whole lifestyle is an extended family where grandparents are helping with the parents and grandchildren out in both directions. And I can see more of this happening because it was a record year in terms of secondary apartments. And it also gives people the independence. If they want to shut the door, they can, and basically have their own lifestyle. But another point that I like to make is that it's coordination. As Kevin's got the figures, in Ontario big city mayors, noted that 256,000 approved housing units are already within the basically 70% of the population. So that's sitting there. And even in my own municipality, we have 4,000 approved building permits that haven't been issued. It's just the builders are hesitating for the reasons I highlighted earlier. And that's a situation we have to find, because every day I go past close to a dozen abandoned or stalled building projects that were approved 3 and 4 years ago. And that's a frustration that I see. And that's one thing that I've encouraged the minister, as well as federal ministers, is let's work together. In 2008 and 2009, we have an infrastructure program where all 3 levels of government work together to build various community facilities. We should be doing the same for housing, because that chart that Mike Moffat puts out, if you just highlight, what's happened over the last 30 years, no matter who's in charge, basically multifamily and assisted housing just basically dropped to 0. We need to work together and put the same type of infrastructure program together to get the housing. Because to give you an idea, the smallest 1-bedroom apartment in my community is almost $2,500 a month to rent and $600,000 to buy. Well, for most couples, that's almost impossible. If you're working on an average wage. And that's where we need to change the atmosphere here and just say, okay, what can we do together and use existing land? Because as anyone, and Kevin's highlighted this as well, is the cheapest way to build housing is on existing services. You've already got the capacity there. You've got the transit, you've got the water, the sewers, all the utilities there. And one thing I've advocated to the ministries and federal ministries is you've got available land. If you can't come up with the money, work out the land, and basically that's your 1/3 contribution. Because you look at how many schools that we've got that are either being closed or thinking being closed. They could be churn around that neighborhood, as well as provincial facilities that are either underutilized or closed.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that was why in this first part, I all the things you guys are talking about are things that I'm seeing in my own neighborhood. For example, we built a little apartment for my mom because she can't get into a nursing home, but she needs a nursing home. And we have neighbors who have bought a property with their parents, and it's like, and their kid, it just seems to be happening all over. But when I also talk to neighbors and within circles that aren't kind of entrenched in the housing discussion, let's say, we hear a lot of well, there's just not enough space to put the houses. Where are we supposed to put them? And I think what we wanted to cover in this first webinar is really directing the narrative away from what we've been told the solutions are, to really looking at those as maybe more of the red herrings and the evidence behind those. And let's start to steer towards what we can actually do. And there's 2 red herrings that I feel are red herrings. Maybe you guys disagree. One of them is about there's not enough land and therefore the greenbelt has to be chopped up. And the other is that municipalities and the red tape, and they're kind of slowing things down. They're not getting stuff done. So Kevin, since I know you kind of dug into the greenbelt part, I'd like you to into the land availability, I'd like you to kind of answer that. And then we'll have a bit of discussion. And Colin, I'd like you to kind of address, is that idea that if municipalities, they just got their act together, housing would be on the table quicker. I'd like you to do that. So Kevin, we'll go to you first about, is land availability the thing that we should be talking about with housing?
Yeah, if Ian can, he's good. I think this answer, or the answer to this question is there. It exists. There's been 3 recent studies that have all found that land shortages are not responsible for housing shortfalls. And one of them was the province's own. The Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force from February 2002, to quote from it, but a shortage of land isn't the cause of the problem. Land is available both inside the existing build-up areas and on undeveloped land outside the green belts. So, even the government's own housing task force said land wasn't an issue. The second study is one I did, which actually took work that was done by municipal staff in the completion of their land needs assessments. And all I did was basically take a look at the existing inventories of land and capacity before any expansions as part of this MCR. And I found over 2 million units of unbuilt housing capacity in the greater Golden Horseshoe alone. The third study was by the regional planning commissioners of Ontario, And they looked at 15 municipalities representing 70% of Ontario's population, and they had over 1.5 million units already under construction, subject to approved applications, or already in applications under review. And this doesn't include Windsor, it doesn't include London, it doesn't include Peterborough, it doesn't include many of additional municipalities, which would add to that total. So when you look at that number, the government is saying we need to build 1.5 million homes by 2031. And in order to do that, we need to pull land out of the Greenbelt. We need to add thousands of hectares to already approved municipal plans. Hamilton, Halton, and the rumor mill is running wild that we're about to see 2,000 plus added to the Waterloo official plan tomorrow. So, when you look at that kind of thing and you look at these studies, land is not the issue. I don't know why it's a focus. If you can go to the next slide, Ian. And they talk about it being a pipeline, and that if you just jam more in, one end, housing comes out the other. But pipelines function best when the diameter of the pipe remains constant. There's no obstructions. Next slide. The reality is the housing is nothing like a pipeline. And in fact, there are so many points at which things need to occur, and it constrains the output. And that's really important. And in fact, when you look at it, it's more like a funnel. If you go to the next slide, Ian, I'll explain what I mean by that. Basically, municipalities start out with the land needed to build the housing required to the planning horizon. And it works its way down through the funnel. There's the major studies municipalities have to do on servicing and secondary planning. Developers submit applications, and out the small end at the bottom eventually comes housing. If you go to the next slide. But if anybody's ever used a funnel, you know that just dumping more water in the top of a funnel doesn't make more come out the small end at the bottom. And this concept that somehow you just keep adding land into the urban area and magically more houses are going to appear, it's just, quite frankly, it's nonsense. And if you go to the next slide, Ian, what you really need to do is concentrate on programs that open up the bottom of the funnel. Adding more land in the top won't do any good. You've got to open up the bottom of the funnel with respect to suburban areas. And that means some of the things that Colin's talked about, streamlining applications through digitization, working with the builders to really understand what are the roadblocks that stop a development? Why is it that they're choosing not to build? How do we cross or knock down that roadblock? Those are the keys. It's not more land. We've answered the question. More land is not required. The other thing that I just want to point out before I leave the slide is the other option is to increase intensification. And there is huge capacity in the already built up areas of our municipality. And as Colin said, these are the areas that have existing services. We need to work to maximize the use of those existing services before we start heading out into greenfield areas at all. And that needs to continue to be a priority as the province makes changes, with the PPS and the growth plan that we're sure are coming. At any rate, with that, thank you. Ian, you can turn them off.
Thanks, Kevin. Colin, before I kind of go to you about the other kind of red herring, I think about municipalities are really to blame. Do you have any comments you'd like to add in reaction to Kevin's analysis
Kevin
there?
highlighted a lot of that. And giving you one example, we have in my region, we have an area in Milton that was approved in the secondary plan in 2005. There's 4 builders there. They basically got all their approvals through the OMB in 2014. They still haven't built one house. It's not a question of adding more land. It's just having, the wherewithal to actually build it. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of builders that just aren't able to do, all the work that's needed, and also the financing challenges. That's the biggest hurdle I find these days, is taking raw land and putting in the servicing, and that's where the province, and that's where we're asking, when they're talking about development charges. Okay, you want to take away $1 billion. Okay, where's your contribution? Because that's something that we've asked the province for a technical working group to have all parties working together on it, because I agree with Kevin, there's some unintended consequences that could come out of these, and we need to make sure that it's fair to everybody. Because I understand the concerns that builders have. I talk to them all the time. And one thing that they also mentioned, I've noticed that in our official plan hearings, that both environmentalists and builders agree that the missing middle or gentle density is the best solution. So let's work together to solve it.
Perfect. And do you have anything to add about, that idea that municipalities just kind of need to get their act together, which was a pretty dominant narrative. Even when I went to Roma, I was very surprised at the brazenness, I guess you could say, of like, you municipal partners, if you just got it built faster, I'm paraphrasing here, we wouldn't have to do these kind of things, right?
Well,
Comments to that?
To disagree, and actually, you look at the approval process. My municipality of Milton came in the top in terms of the speed of delivery. Sure, some municipalities take longer than others, but they have some challenges. And no one municipality, and that's one thing we've mentioned to the province and the federal government, is one size fits all. Every community is different. Every community has servicing challenges as well as other challenges in the planning process. So just getting things approved faster may not necessarily work things through. You have to make sure that it fits the community, because if it doesn't, you could end up with some challenges even worse, because we have to look at the long term. When you're building a house or apartment building, you're looking from 50 to 60 years, what we call the effective life of a building. If you don't do it right, you could end up in a situation where, as you've seen in some properties in Toronto, where you spend the rest of the decades thinking we made a mistake here, but it's too late to correct it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Kevin, do you have any
Yeah,
comments to add to that?
I need to stand up and defend municipalities, because I think, those criticisms were valid 10, 15 years ago. And we worked hard to make sure that the systems were as streamlined as possible. I agree, and all you have to do is take a look at the amount of approved development that's out there that's not moving forward. It's actually incredible, and it's a full range. People will say, oh, the only thing that's approved are apartments. That's not true. There are, tons of single detached units out there approved in greenfield areas that are not moving forward. And, it's almost like we have a development industry that has focused in on several products, and the market is changing, and they're in the process of adjusting to that change. And something, it's tough to do, but the blame on this one, if there is blame, goes wide. Everybody shares a bit of it. I don't think there's any question. Municipalities can do better. The development industry can do better. The province has got to stop changing the bloody rules every couple of years. We went from we had a population forecast come out in 2013 that were never implemented. Not one municipality implemented them, because they changed the PPS in 2015. They changed the growth plan in 2017. They changed the growth plan again in 2019. They changed the population forecast again in 2020. Municipalities have done nothing but scramble for a decade just to find solid ground from which to move forward. They keep changing things constantly. Give municipalities a set of rules, let them alone to work with the development industry, and let's get it done. We need to focus on actually delivering the housing, rather than all the stuff going on around.
I'm going to use a term whenever I talk to builders and developers in our area. A term that always comes up is certainty. And I like your point because, sorry, I have my phone going in the background, another rookie mistake. But that'll end in a second. Anyways, the one thing that they talk about with municipalities is the idea of certainty. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because all of these policy swings and shifts, and now your growth forecasts are this, and now they're that. Here's a new rule, makes it really difficult to get anywhere. And I know in my area in Simcoe County, a lot of our planning departments might be 1 or 2 people deep. I mean, they don't have a lot of people to not only just deal with the planning applications that they have, which are coming fast and furious, but now they have to dedicate some of their staff to, conform and make sure they're consistent. And on top of that, in our area, we're losing our regional planning level, which would sometimes help with that shift. So I'll also take this quick moment to stand up for the conservation authorities, because my local conservation authority, I was talking to some staff there, and they did the calculations. 97% of the time, they meet their timelines as far as approvals and getting feedback on it. And the concern is, especially with those smaller municipalities that don't have really deep staff, is now who's going to do the job of the conservation authority that they were relying on to help them advise about natural heritage and water and protection of a regional system versus it's a bit of a mess. So I don't think the blame should go to any one element like you were suggesting, Kevin. I think everybody wants to do it better. But these shifts, and we're hearing there could be some more policy shifts coming up tomorrow. So, then we're back in it again, figuring out, okay, what does that change? So I really appreciate that point. So let's shift and kind of prepare for, the discussion about, we can understand that the narrative probably is disjointed, probably puts too much onus on some actors and not enough in the others. Some of the solutions that propose, such as, municipalities are the issue or land is the issue, probably aren't the effective solutions that municipalities need to be looking at. They need to be thinking about maybe more like your funnel. So obviously also too, municipalities in this, considering this is going to municipal leaders, mostly, there's only so much a municipality can control over housing. There's a federal role, there's a provincial role, there's a private interest role. But if a municipality is like, yes, we have a housing problem, we have to be a part of this 1.5 million, how can a municipality determine what their housing problem is and start moving away from the red herring? So what are some action steps should be taken to get a municipality out of the kind of the ineffective, distracting conversations and into where they really need to be focusing? And I'll start with you, Colin, and then Kevin, if you want to add on or provide your own ideas.
Well, I agree with your points about changing provincial and federal rules. It's something that I've had to try and figure, okay, what's happening next year, because you're right, more things are happening, but there are also good things. If you look at today, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing announced more protections for new home buyers and renters, which is needed because unfortunately some people, builders and landlords, are taking advantage. But it's again, what I'm looking at is having a balance. And as Kevin pointed out with builders, they're actually changing. I know 3 large builders that were known for building single family detached homes. Now they're building 6 to 15 story buildings because they realize that's where the market is. And as was pointed out to me as an appraiser, if you don't have the first time buyers buying that first house, everything else collapses. And we've seen that over the last 6 months. The real estate market is shrunk considerably, and you've got people at the top end wondering, okay, where's my buyers? Well, the buyers, can't get the financing. So we have to look at that and realize that the market changes all the time, but you don't need to have planning. You need to have certainty. And that's what builders, and I understand from a number of them, they're caught because they were thinking of one thing and now they're moving on to something else. We can all contribute. And that's one thing that we're working at AMO with all parties is, okay, how can we do this better? And rather than point fingers, let's extend hands. Let's, do workshops. Let's similar to this and just say, okay, what's the best solutions? What's the best practices throughout the world? Because you can see other communities and countries where they have innovations. Holland is actually one of the best examples where they have, very, very dense developments, but they also have a lot of green space. And they have a transportation system and servicing that can be done without having to go to sprawl or high rises. It's somewhere in the middle, and I think we can find some common ground there. And I believe there is enough people out there that want to talk, rationally rather than pointing fingers.
Sorry,
You're on.
another, I know, it's the end and my brain's now going. I think you're right, Colin, but there's been a binary. Like if you're not building sprawl, then you're building towers. And I think what scared, at least from the perspective of a few councillors in my region, which is we have to add all of these houses now, and people aren't going to want to have a 26 tower, we're talking maybe a municipality of 15,000 people. They're like, we have to now put a tower right up, 15-story tower. And I'm like, there's a lot of options beyond and between sprawling or going really tall. Anyways, so thank you for that, Colin. That's a great point. And Kevin, what do you think about, how does a municipality go, okay, we got to stop buying into this false narrative, if you will, of like, this is where the frenzy is located, and start getting down to what are the steps my municipality needs to take to get into the solutions?
Yeah, and just I'll be really quick because I think you want to get to the questions. 4 things. Number one is you've got to define the actual problem in your municipality. You've got to go in and take a look at the data. What is the need for affordable housing? What price points? How are you going to deliver that? You need to take a look at seniors housing is a huge one that people don't realize the gray tsunami that's coming and the housing needs that they're going to be faced, that segment is going to be faced with. So you've got to figure that out. Second, you need to start to bring together broad-based coalitions, especially to deliver on affordable housing. Let's face it, throughout the recent history in Ontario, and that goes back 40, 50 years, the private sector has never on its own delivered affordable housing for the lowest segment of our income. There's not a profit to be made on it. And, let's face it, the traditional housing industry is profit driven, but the affordable housing will only be broad-based coalitions of all 3 levels of government, cooperatives, nonprofits, charitable groups. We need to start bringing those together now and making sure that we encourage them. Third, you need to start talking to the development industry. We need to talk. We need to figure out exactly what's holding up development. We need to make sure that we nurture those relationships. It's not adversarial between developers, the municipality, and the community. We all need to start talking. Fourth, it's time to really get laser focused on solutions. We've been, including me, we've been whining away for the last 3 or 4 months about all these changes, all these things happening. But the reality is this provincial government is going to do what this provincial government does. They're not listening to people. They're not listening to municipalities. And in fact, it's time. We just have to move forward. These are serious issues with the housing that we need to resolve. And we need to figure out how we're going to do it locally, because it's not going to just instantly be resolved through some dictate from the province. It'll be resolved by councils working closely with their citizens and their local building industry to come up with creative solutions. And the fourth one, I would just, coming out of the comment that you made, Margaret, the fourth one is we need to really start working with the community to get them to understand that, a problem isn't just a problem when it affects you. it's a problem when it affects the whole community. And the housing issues that we've got here, even though someone might feel right now, well, I don't want an accessory dwelling in the house across the street. The reality is that may be your son or daughter's first place of residence. It may be where, your parents end up living because it's the type of thing that they'll be able to afford in the future. The solutions are there. We just need to work together. We need to stop the concept that I'm hurt because somebody else is helped, and it's time to move forward.
Thank you for that. I think you're right. People sometimes get afraid of the change because, they go, this is going to change everything. And I think what you said, Colin, about looking at outside of Ontario, looking internationally, we've got some jurisdictions that are light years ahead, and they are finding their communities more equitable, more affordable, happier, healthier, for all generations and not just for first-time home buyers, right? So anyways, I wish that I could continue.
One additional comment. Look to Australia. They're doing amazing things in Australia, and it's not one that people necessarily default to, especially around this type of housing. The other thing is people need to start thinking about how to visualize densities for people so they understand it doesn't have to be 26-story towers. There's lots of stuff in the middle. So with that, I'll shut up.
No worries. I'm going to turn it over. I mean, I could continue to talk to you guys for ever, but there are some audience questions beyond what I have. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ian. And the panelists have agreed. I think, I'm not sure about Kevin, but Colin has it. We're going to stay a little bit after 5, like 5:05 for audience questions. And then if there's anybody that wants to chat with each other more informally, we'll stay on for an extra 10 minutes. I'll stay on for an extra 10 minutes. Nobody else is required to. So that's that. So anyways, Ian, I'll turn off my video and then I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Margaret. We have a few good questions in here, some very detailed. I will ask Colin and Kevin if you use as much detail as you would like, but if we can keep them the answer shorter, that way we can get to as many as we can. So starting off, Beth asked, I'm curious if you could touch on partnerships with nonprofits on attainable housing. For example, the approach being taken by the town of Blue Mountain.
I'm unaware of the specifics around Blue Mountain. There's no question that ultimately nonprofits, co-ops, et cetera, are going to play a key role in how we, get ourselves out of the situation we're in. They are absolutely critical. And as municipal councils, I think we really, really have to consider, supporting them strongly because they're so important to resolving the problems that we're in.
Colin, did you want to weigh in on that one?
Yep, sure. Actually, in the Halton region, the region is in charge of housing. Our Halton Community Housing works very closely with nonprofit groups such as Habitat for Humanity and actually assisted them and basically built a 12-plex in Burlington. And there is other situations where you basically share information because you find the best practices and also help people out because for a lot of people that are in need of housing, they don't know where to go and basically work together because it is a real challenge for people that are either starting out or basically homeless to find places. And I think, let's look at all the options because I think there's a lot of innovative solutions there.
Great, and thank you. And the next question I'll ask you to is from Kay. And they asked, if you had been asked to write Bill 23, what would you have called for? What should Bill 23 have done? And I'll caveat that. I'll add on my own little question to the end there. I'll say, was Bill 23 even necessary? Or was a bill like Bill 23 necessary? So if you were to write Bill 23, you could go back in time and be the one to write Bill 23. What would you have written, if anything at all? And Colin, I'll hand it to you first on this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, it's not easy answering hypothetical questions. The main thing I would have done is at least consult all parties and work something out and also set the example The province has asked municipalities to reduce development charges, which effectively is almost $1 billion a year. And what I've asked, the ministers is, okay, what are you doing? I appreciate you're making some regulation changes, but we need all three levels of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, to do something. And that's where Ontario big city mayors asked, almost a year ago, let's sit down, let's work it out together. We did it before. We did the same through COVID. I appreciate all the work that the province and the federal government did helping municipalities out, but we need to do it again. And we've shown we can do it.
Just really quickly, I think my response would be in part to dodge the question, but I'll give you one response that I think is absolutely, straightforward, and that is exactly what Colin said. You've got to consult. This is a problem that is incredibly complex. We have solutions that have been proposed by one segment of the housing process, and that's really being the development industry. They seem to have had an oversized voice in this. And quite frankly, the solutions that have been proposed have created unintended consequences that I don't think anybody anticipated that was writing the bill. But there's an awful lot of people out here that if they'd consulted with could have told them what would result from things like waiving development charges. I mean, they backed away from that relatively quickly after the fact to say they'll make everybody whole. What does make everybody whole actually mean? There was not a penny in the budget to make municipalities whole on development charge shortfalls, although they've reiterated it now in the legislature a couple of days ago. But again, it's subject to an audit, and it's implying that somehow municipalities have bags of money stored somewhere that is just there as and if they'd only used that, all the problems would disappear. Municipalities need the dollars to pay for the types of infrastructure that the development industry needs in order to build houses. It's somewhat mind-numbing.
And on that, Ben asked a really good follow-up question that I think follows from what you were talking about there, Kevin and Colin. Ben asked, we are hearing that the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund is supposed to make up the municipal development charge shortfall caused by Bill 23. Isn't that just funding developers by federal tax dollars? Is it really, and that's me, there was an extra A in there, so is it really going to reduce the cost of housing or accelerate building?
Well, I spoke to the finance minister about that, the federal one, and they said that absolutely in no uncertain terms that is not to do that. It is basically similar to what we did with the infrastructure. Remember back in 2008 and 9, we had a program that basically got things built within 18 months. And I was part of that. And it was everybody worked together, no matter what the political stripe was, whether the conservative, liberal, municipal, whatever level. We've shown we can do it before, we can do it again. It's just a question of everybody coming to the table, everybody contributing there for sure, whether it's in land or in building costs. And as we see municipalities, for the last 30 years have had to manage housing. We got everything dumped on us, almost 30 years ago. We can handle that part of it. So, all we have to do is people wanting to do something together, and we can.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Kevin?
I'll just echo Colin for brevity here. At the end of the day, we know it's not coming from there. We've been told that specifically. We don't know where it's coming from. But again, this is the lack of clarity, that there is so much confusion out there. How can a municipality that is dealing with budgets with hundreds of millions of dollars in them, and we're talking about a potential shortfall that's huge in one of the inputs to that budget, and there is no budgeted money at this point that we're aware of to resolve that problem. How does a municipality move forward? And that's the type of confusion that is exactly the opposite of what we need now. We need certainty. We need partnerships. We need, honest dialogue between us all in order to come to good, solid answers and allow municipal councils to move forward.
And on that note, we've had a few variations of kind of the same question, but I'm going to go with Debbie's. Debbie asked, attainable and affordable are used interchangeably by developers and city staff. In the context of inclusionary zoning, what would you consider affordable? What would you consider attainable? Or I guess, is there a difference when we're talking about those things?
Let me jump in first with at least a definition standpoint. Again, just adding confusion to the process, they've redefined affordable from what was a standard definition that people had used for an extended period of time, which was based on income. And they've now made it based on house sales, a percentage of house sales. Then they've included all kinds of regulations, regulations that speak to attainable, but there's no definition for attainable. They've yet to define it by regulation. So again, attainable houses are subject to development charge waivers in certain circumstances, and municipalities are trying to figure out the impact. We don't even have a definition of attainable. And, it could be anything. It could actually, in theory, it could be anything from everything, down to some subset. And until they go through the process of defining it, we don't have a clue. Colin?
Yeah, I agree. It's unfortunately the terms are used interchangeably, and actually the Rural Ontario Municipal Association came up with 70 recommendations, and one of them was, what is the definition? Usually, most people, it's 30% of your income, to house payments. Well, unfortunately, that just went through the roof when you've gone from 2% financing to 6% if you can qualify. And that's the problem for a lot of people, even just getting the down payment and those other points. And the same things happen to builders. We just had a tender come back for a new police building in Halton Region. It started off at $260 a square foot. Tenders came back $800 a square foot. Well, other builders, it's the same costs they're facing. So we have a number of challenges here, and let's work together. And first of all, let's get the definition. So our treasurers, because over the last few months, the treasurers are the ones that are telling the councillors that, okay, we have a problem here that's going to hit us right away in the next year.
Thank you. And then moving on, question from Peggy about the elimination of conservation authorities, or at least conservation authority traditional activities, and their expertise when it comes to addressing flooding and erosion with regards to development. I think they were just looking for some comments and some additional details about what's going to happen next now that that work isn't being done by those agencies.
Kevin, do you want to handle that one first?
We went through some of this back in 1995 when the province downloaded a ton of responsibilities from the provincial ministries, and we had to scramble just in order to keep the wheels on the process for about 3 years. We had to go out and hire environmental planners. The conservation authorities jumped in and took on some responsibilities on behalf of municipalities. And they've continued to do that, some on a contract basis to this day. To all of a sudden say, upper tier planning's gone. So the environmental planning, all of those things that otherwise were done at the upper tier are conceivably, they're out of the process. Conservation authorities, especially around flooding and non-hazard lands, are out of the process to a great degree. And we're doing this in a time of climate change. Like, none of this makes sense. It is so short-sighted. And maybe somebody on here has asked about what about the conservation authorities being forced to inventory their land in order to sell off any that is potentially developable? I mean, here we're trying to increase densities in cities. We need recreational lands more than ever now. And yet here's another thing where the government, it's like somebody got a great idea and didn't think it all the way through to the end. It is absolutely crazy that, you know, in the region of Waterloo, that a good chunk of Laurel Creek or, you know, Dumfries, like those are so critical to providing quality of life to our citizens. To sell them off is just, you know, so short-sighted.
Colin?
Yeah, so similar on that, that's one thing that we requested from AMO and other organizations is to have a technical working group to go through these unintended consequences, because you're right, even my town and regional planners say, okay, who's going to take care of this now? We don't have the expertise or the people to take care of this. So we've met with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Natural Resources and say, here's our issues. And they've come back to us with, you know, having staff work out some of these details, because yeah, a lot of challenge. I can understand the province's concerns with some conservation authorities, but we need to work together and basically solve a lot of these issues, because, you know, there are issues in all areas.
Thank you. And then we'll just ask one more question. And we have a good chunky one from Fiona here. And apologies to everyone who asked really good questions and we haven't gone to them. This was a really good Q&A session this time around, a really good panel too. But Fiona had a bit of a prelude and then has a question. Some municipalities in the region I live in are pushing new residential developments on PSWs, or provincially significant wetlands, and woodlands, even though they're well over the housing target and the Ford government has set. Residents are complaining that their city council is neglecting repairs of existing roads and other services in favor of attracting new development, which is going to cost the municipality. They are being told that development charges will cover the costs of new suburbs and that the burden won't fall on residents. Is this the case?
I'll take a first run, Colin. One of the things that we found over the years is the municipal councils look at development as free assessment. That development charges typically pay for the upfront costs, and they look at it as, gee, we're getting free assessment. It's furthest thing from the truth. You know, they cost far more than they actually collect in taxes. But, you know, the main thing is, and we see it happening, you know, in-ground services have a 25 to 40-year lifespan. And so it may be free to put them in the ground the first time, but all of a sudden you've got all these suburbs where you got to go in and replace the pipes at the cost of the existing taxpayer. And so, you know, some councils go, well, wow, we need more development in order to gain more free assessment, in order to pay for the cost of the free assessment we just had. And it happens again and again. And what you create is a municipal Ponzi scheme, because at the end of the day, somebody is going to have to pay for it. And the more suburbs you create through that type of action, the more liabilities you have in the long run. And, you know, it doesn't pay for itself.
Yeah, exactly. I think Orange County in California found out the hard way. They had to declare bankruptcy. But on the development charges, you know, as pointed out by many treasurers, it only covers 85% of the costs, because under the Development Charges Act, which the province set and revised a few years ago, you know, there are a number of exemptions. So basically the existing taxpayer has to pick up the difference. And Kevin's right. In the long term, a lot of this new assessment doesn't cover the operating costs. So you're endlessly trying to do this or trying to get industrial commercial assessment. And they've had their own challenges over the last few years, especially in the retail sector. They've actually declined because of online shopping and deliveries.
Well, on that note, I'm going to hand it back over to Franz. But thank you so much, everyone who submitted your questions. And we'll be wrapping up. Thank you so much. And Franz, take it away.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Kevin, for a very informative hour. And thank you to all of our participants for your questions. That was really useful. We will be making this recording available in the coming days. I'll send the video link to everyone who is registered. And we're about to wrap up. But first, we have one poll question to help us find out what you thought of this event. So, Ian, if you could just put that up and let us know where you're at.
Yeah, so we'll just keep that up until we reach 90+% respondents. Thank you so much, everyone.
Wow. I wish elections were like this. All done in 2 minutes.
Just take a little bit longer. I understand some folks there. There we go. And I'll share the results. And so every single one of you found this session either helpful or very helpful. So I think that's very good.
Great turnout rate.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get the same the next election.
Thank you very much for that feedback from all the participants. If you have any additional comments, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at info@livableontario.ca. And Ian's just going to put that into the chat so that you know how to get me. Before we conclude, let me just say a few brief words about the Municipal Leaders for Stronger Communities in this series. Our hope is that these webinars will build a sense of community that will help municipal leaders be more effective. And our next webinar is planned for early May and will once again focus on housing, as Margaret suggested. So stay tuned, you'll get notification about it. Finally, a very big thanks to EcoSpark for partnering with us. And once again, a big thank you to Margaret Prophet, Colin Best, Kevin Eby, and for a great panel discussion, and Ian for helping us with Zoom. And a big thanks to all of you for joining us today as we build a stronger communities.